Well, let's turn our attentions to today's Adult Forum, which is on a very different topic, but certainly something that is equally pressing and continues to be a long-term systemic, challenge for the entire world. Those of us who call Minnesota home are not immune to the consequences of climate change. And considering that this coming week we celebrate the annual celebration or the annual opportunity to sort of recognize the earth and this place that God has created for us and given us charge over and invites us into stewardship of, is a compelling reason for us to take a few moments and think about how climate change is affecting, and that's enough. I'll let Carol introduce and lead us through this today, and I'm going to be running some technology in the background. But we're hoping that you all have some thoughts and will be able to reflect and share in your thoughts. And as typical, if you want to join in the conversation, just sort of raise your hand or put something in the chat, and I'll monitor that, and we'll call on you as options. We've got some videos to watch, so Carol, take it away.
Okay, well, Peter just about said everything that needs to be said. So we wanted to do something for Earth Day, and I guess I sort of assigned myself that task as someone who's always been very interested in the environment, back to my many years of backpack leading back in my 20s. And there's so many out there, so I decided it makes sense to focus on what's going on in Minnesota. So we have about 5 or 6 clips. Each one is, well, the first one's about 6 minutes long. The rest are only about 4 minutes long, between 4 and 5 minutes. And so we can maybe take a few minutes between each one for a comment or two. But it's mostly to listen to them and to hear the stories that you hear and make your own connections. But we will have time for a couple of minutes of comments. Also think about, like Peter was mentioning, we are, as Christians, honored to be God's steward for the earth. And what does that mean? And so hopefully these will maybe help you reflect on that. And our conversation today can help us all reflect on that. So let's get to it. With the first one is from Fox News, and then we will be, whoops, that's the second one, Peter. There we go.
Well, for many farmers, this is a harvest they'd like to forget. It was a late start in the spring, and it's turning into a late and long harvest this fall.
And with climate change, it may just be a sign of what's to come. Tom Lyon is here with a look at what the changing weather patterns mean for farmers, Tom.
Right. Kelsey, Randy, in a normal year, the harvest would be mostly over, and yet here we are with plenty of corn and sugar beets still in the fields. In Minnesota, we have weather data going back to 1820, pioneer records from Fort Snelling. What we are seeing this year and in the last few is unprecedented in 200 years of meteorological data. And get ready, because it's just beginning. It's been a year like none other for Minnesota farmers.
These are cows floating down the river.
A deluge of rain in southern Minnesota.
Poor cattle.
And a flash flood that swept dozens of cows down a river. And the rain never seemed to stop. Late getting into the fields, farmers left 1 million acres of corn unplanted. When it comes to weather, the new normal is anything but.
You have no idea if we're going to be hot, dry, wet. As if things weren't bad enough for Minnesota farmers between low prices and tariffs, there's also the small matter of the weather. It has been a notoriously wet summer in Minnesota. Many farmers were late getting their crops in. Today is July 2nd, and this is corn. You've heard the expression knee high by the 4th of July. This corn isn't even close.
What we have now in the weather climate game is we have a weather trajectory. The inherent variability on our weather leash is longer. So when the weather wanders, it has the capability to wander more profoundly in either direction.
Mark Seeley, a climatologist with the U of M, has been watching Minnesota weather patterns for 40 years. Our climate, he says, is at a crossroads, and it's a story of extremes.
So when it gets wet, it gets wetter. When it gets dry, it gets drier. We're in a wet cycle right now, though, that is almost unparalleled in our measured climate history.
In fact, this has been Minnesota's wettest year on record, and it's a trend. 16 of the last 17 years have been well above average for rainfall. It's also getting warmer, or more precisely, not as cold. Winter low temperatures are up by 4 to 6 degrees, a significant increase. And seasons of minus 40 are becoming less frequent. But for farmers, a brutal winter is nature's pesticide.
The good old Minnesota old-fashioned winter won't inflict the high levels of mortality on these pathogens, microbes, and insects that it used to.
Those bugs may not only survive winter, they'll appear earlier in the spring, maybe in April instead of May. And summer temps, especially nighttime lows, are getting warmer too. That could mean a longer growing season with potentially higher yields for corn and soybeans. But again, crop of company.
Certain insect species, certain pests, if you will, plant pathogens, disease spores, insect pests, love warm nights.
10 years ago, we hardly ever saw that beetle, and they've been ramping up the last couple of years. And this year is actually the most I've seen.
Brent Fuchs says he's seeing it already, like the Japanese stink beetle chewing on his soybeans. Farmers are seeing more soybean fungi, like frog eye leaf spot and white mold. And the corn fungi, southern rust and tar spot, were both recently discovered in Minnesota for the very first time. And it's just beginning. Climate change will impact everything from the seeds farmers plant to the pesticides they use. From 200 years of weather data, we know the pace of climate change is now accelerating. Latitude is no longer destiny. The new normal is here.
What we're not going to see is a sudden abatement of this. It's not suddenly going to stop.
To some extent, even the phrase "the new normal" really misses the mark. Farmers simply don't have experience with such massive variations over the long term, and we're not even sure what this new normal really looks like yet. Ian and I have been talking about this really for the last couple of months, and I think what strikes me is that the pace of change is really increasing, and it also matches some of these computer models, right?
Yeah, the signals aren't going away. As a matter of fact, the climate change signals are getting stronger by the year, by the long-range model run. You look at the last 100 years, we've picked up over 3 inches of average annual precipitation in the Twin Cities. Statewide, since 1950, our average annual temperature is up over 3 degrees. You know, as a meteorologist, we look for fractions of that, and we'd be alarmed. We're looking at massive numbers here. As I mentioned, the signals are getting stronger.
And to underscore the issue, it will change everything about farming, from seeds to pesticides to techniques.
Isn't it hard, though, sometimes to get the message through, whatever that message is, when we have these, it's too cold in November, it's too cold in October.
And it is. And
we talk about warming.
There's a confusion of weather and climate. Weather is something we deal with every day. Climate happens over hundreds, thousands of years. So we could have a winter where you say, wow, it feels like old time. But it's just a blip on a very large scale. Mm-hmm. And it's that signal that keeps getting stronger and stronger. We're supposed to be good stewards of the earth. What I think Tom did so well with this piece is talk about what's happening here in Minnesota.
Here
and really brought it home so we can think more and more about it.
Yeah. And how much we need that cold weather.
We've talked to them, yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
So that's what we often think of as climate change, is what's happening to the rural farmers. Any other thoughts?
Kurt does. Kurt, you'll need to unmute yourself.
This video is about 3 years old.
2019, November 2019.
It's 3 years old as far as the weather and crop is concerned, because this year, Minnesota experienced the second best crop they've ever had in history of Minnesota. Not the wettest, but it was 2 years ago. One comment is that it's going to change everything. It's two things that's changing. Our scientists as crop breeders have developed crops that grow in a longer season, which we have now. You didn't see corn growing north of Iowa in 1968 or 9. Now you see corn for seed going 100 miles into Canada. That's change. I can say that farmers have taken the challenge up. They've done a lot of things differently in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And as mentioned, climate is a lot of years. The weather is here today and gone tomorrow. But the people most affected are the farmers in Minnesota. And they have grown, as an example, what's the produce of corn in a field? In 1968, it averaged about 90 to 100 bushel. Southern Minnesota, how many bushel per acre do you think they produced this last year? Most of them averaged about 240 bushel, 40, 50 bushel. They've acquiesced to it, but because they've had different crop production procedures, you don't find a plow anymore. They don't use plows. They use cultivators that leave the trash on top and leaves a lot of the microbes, I think it was mentioned in here, available for plants. So you find some people that have had to change a lot of us for the good. It's not all bad.
Yeah, I agree. It's not all bad. And this is the opportunity. I think a lot of people are saying this is the opportunity to be, looking towards the future and making changes that are really much more sustainable. And agriculture is a huge thing. There's a lot of stuff out there on that. And the regenerative farming, how to get perennial crops, food crops in instead of annual, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Let's move on to the next group. I found this Zoom meeting between Climate Generation and legislators in Minnesota that are on the climate caucuses. And they had an hour-and-a-half Zoom meeting in February 2nd. And so we're going to see some clips from that. Go ahead, Peter.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Minnesota Voices on Climate Change, a joint caucus event. My name is Josna Harris, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy. And I'm joining you from the Twin Cities on the occupied land of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. I'll be moderating our evening together, featuring a powerful lineup of testimony from scientists, storytellers, musicians, and poets from across our state. Climate Generation is thrilled to co-host this event with the Minnesota House Climate Action Caucus and the Minnesota Senate Clean Energy and Climate Caucus. First, I'd like to thank our legislators who are here tonight. Your presence sends a strong message that you are hearing your fellow Minnesotans and are firsthand accounts of climate change. I'd also like to thank the viewers who are joining tonight from the public to watch via live stream. The testimonies that you will hear tonight are only a few of the powerful stories to tell, because in this time of the greatest evidence, it is clear that we are all eyewitnesses to climate change. In preparation for this event, Climate Generation mailed each of you, as our legislators, a copy of the Eyewitness Minnesota Voices on Climate Change book, which is a collection of testimonies of our changing climate. And we hope that you enjoy reading it. All of the speakers tonight are here calling for urgent and bold action on climate justice, some that you may recognize from the book. Climate change is not a single issue, but it is interconnected with issues of racial injustice, the pandemic, and the economic crisis that we are facing. Climate change amplifies every challenge facing our communities. Minnesota holds many of the worst racial disparities across health, housing, income, and education that make communities of color among the most impacted by climate change. The opportunity is now to prioritize climate justice and to rebuild our economy in a way that is rooted in community voices and that addresses the multiple impacts that our communities face. For a long time, we've talked about climate change from mostly a scientific perspective. But in this time of disinformation and polarization, it's our stories that helped us to connect to one another and connect the head and the heart, which is essential to spark and sustain action. Our goal for tonight is to ask you to simply listen with an open heart, and to ponder and process what you hear tonight, and then to act.
So that's the introduction to this Zoom meeting. She raises the points that this is interconnected between all sorts of social things and social issues, as well as economic and political and social and environmental. It's all kind of wrapped up together. Anyone want to make any comments before we go on? Okay, let's go ahead. We're going to hear from first, excuse me, to give you kind of an overview, we're going to listen to a few minutes to Dr. Rossi, who is from Abbott Northwest Hospital, who talks about health issues. And then we'll be hearing from Pastor Kristen Foster, who's a Lutheran pastor up in the Iron Range. And then if we have time, Izzy Letterman, who is a youth from Duluth and who is disabled and talks about what disabilities mean in a pandemic and climate change. And then we get a poem from Dr. Katie, who is an Anishinaabe who works with public health at the University of Minnesota. So let's go ahead and hear from the doctor. We have that.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Rossi, Dr. Federico Rossi, who is a practicing physician in Minneapolis on staff at Abbott Northwestern Hospital, with a special interest in the impact of climate change and health. Welcome, Dr. Rossi.
Yes, good evening. As you heard, my name is Federico Rossi. I'm a physician at Abbott Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis. And thank you for having me here tonight. And thanks to everybody for joining us. This is super important. Yes, indeed, as we've heard, climate change has been increasingly affecting the health and well-being of all of us in a number of ways, some obvious, some not so obvious. The exponential rise in unnatural disasters that we're seeing across the world is threatening the security of so many by wiping out homes, disrupting food supply chains, and leading to increasing number of climate refugees. Invariably, the health of these families comes into jeopardy, not just by being exposed to the fury of these stronger elements, such as hurricanes, wildfires, floods, droughts, and heat waves, but also leaving permanent psychological scars on these communities that will last long after the homes are rebuilt. A less obvious example is the rise of infectious diseases related to climate change. Locally, Lyme disease, which was a rarity in Minnesota 30 years ago, is now a commonplace diagnosis that can affect any of us who spends time outdoors. This is directly linked to the warming winters, enabling the rise in tick populations. However, the same infectious disease story is seen time and time again with a number of diseases around the world, whether it be Zika virus, the dengue fever, yellow fever, just to name a few. The rise of pulmonary diseases that we're seeing is also clearly linked to climate change. For example, we're seeing both adults and children. Studies have clearly linked increasing particulates in our atmosphere, and it's not just from the pollutants from the ongoing burning fossil fuels, but also the ever-increasing particulates being released from now commonplace mega wildfires and the lengthening of our allergy seasons. Furthermore, all of these pulmonary diseases are exacerbated by our warming temperatures. So indeed, whether it be from heart diseases or pregnancy-related illnesses, we're now seeing the impact of climate change on our health. And just like we've seen with the COVID pandemic, we're seeing the more vulnerable low-income communities and communities of color being impacted disproportionately. One of my personal experiences with climate change and health relates to my middle child who was diagnosed with asthma 3 summers ago when she began noticeably wheeze during a time of particularly poor air quality, in part affected by faraway wildfires that were burning in Canada. And just a year later, my niece and nephew had their school canceled and had to flee to a different part of California to escape the very poor air quality caused by local wildfires. They were not even allowed to go outside in their backyard to play at the time. That's how bad the air quality was. But then again, more wildfires later this summer and fall in California forced them to leave their home and temporarily relocate with us in Minnesota. Please, realizing that the stakes are so high, let us face the greatest challenge of our lives head on and acknowledge the level of gravity it commands. Given the scale and magnitude, we will undoubtedly need to work across political parties and collaborate with all nations around the world to effectively address climate change. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi, for your testimony and for your work joining us here tonight. I really appreciate how you make
Okay, so health issues. What are your comments or feelings about health issues?
Sorry, we don't have our video on, but this is Michael and Martina Ashworth. Something that we've noticed and have read a couple articles on is just that the changes in temperature in winter and spring are resulting in earlier release of pollen and greater amounts of pollen released, and just how that affects people's health, kind of like how the doctor talked about that in the last video.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that too as a person who has a sensitivity to that.
Carol?
I was going to say, Susan, I was hoping you would probably chime in about Lyme disease.
Right. Yeah, I just got out of the hospital yesterday for my surgery, so I'm a little foggy here. But yeah, I mean, I've got a son who's got chronic long-term Lyme disease, which is so much more common than we know. They've even done a lot of autopsies on people with different kind of long-term autoimmune diseases and keep finding Lyme disease. So anyway, yeah, that is definitely a big issue. And I think, like he said, with increased warmth, it's going to be happening more and more. So.
My daughter has been affected more with allergies and a touch of asthma now.
Mm-hmm. should we move into the next piece?
Keep moving on, because we've got some good things to hear, and hearing the stories is a huge part of this. And you're going to hear a lot of stories in the news, I know, this week too, because of Earth Day. CBS is already advertising that. So let's hear the next one, which is the pastor from the Iron Range.
Not, last but definitely not least, Reverend Kristen Foster, who's joining us from Iron Range. And Reverend Foster has served for 3 decades as pastor of Messiah Lutheran Church in Mountain Iron. Reverend Foster also founded the Iron Range Partnership for Sustainability in 2009, in which she continues to play a leadership role. Welcome.
There. Well, it has been such an inspiration to hear everybody. And I'm going to come to this conversation in just slightly differently from the Iron Range. For over 30 years, Minnesota's Iron Range has been my acquired home, mine and my husband's. And I have to say that its beauty and magnetism are also an acquired taste. Pockmarked by mine pits, the horizon is silhouetted by the broad grassy anvils of reclaimed mine dumps, with flat expanses previously logged out but now scrubbed by spruce and aspen, with willows taking hold in once tended pastures of abandoned farms. As I said, this topography is an acquired taste. But the peculiar beauty and resiliency of the Iron Range has etched itself into our family's landscape. And I imagine with foreboding what climate changes will do to this place, its animals, and its people. You may have heard, if you've ever been on the Iron Range, the saying that people who grow up on the Iron Range have iron filings in their blood, which eventually draws them back home. So this saying refers not just to the topography, but to the dominant economic history, which you all know gives the Iron Range its name. First there was logging, then came mining, first iron, then taconite, more recently the prospect of copper and nickel. Call it an economy of extraction, where work depends on what can be removed from the ground and shipped elsewhere, most of the profits included. Those who use that phrase, iron filings in the blood, however, know that the magnetism that brings people back to the range is not metallurgical, but relational and ecological. They love this place. It is home. This is the conundrum. People here love this land, this water, these seasons, yet mining has historically been the foundation of their livelihood. Sulfide mining right now continues to be a hot issue, with lawn signs all over here proclaiming we support mining and mining supports us in some kind of a blanket way. I want you to know that this comes from people's need for jobs with dignity, whether I agree with their position or not. There are also people here who understand that the range needs a wider lens, that we cannot separate the means of making a living from that which sustains life. And in fact, we don't need to do that. It's not jobs versus the environment. And there are many Iron Rangers that are finding a new path to strengthen community, invigorate our economy, and steward the earth and water. The Iron Range Partnerships for Sustainability is dedicated to that. Responsible action for the common good must always contend with conundrums, profound ones. The conundrums of the Iron Range have their own distinct edges, but they are no harder than the conundrums where you may live. The hospitals that discard unconscionable amounts of plastic, all of the ways that we contribute to the very degradation that we deplore. We cannot, however, let the conundrums neutralize us. As Will Steger said, we're out of time. So my closing blessing is that we draw courage and wisdom from these stories as we each seek ways to care for and restore our common home for the common good now. Thank you.
So we hear about the Iron Range and the conundrum of mining offering or being the main source of jobs, and yet knowing that mining has in the past injured a lot of the environment and has changed the environment so much. How do you get new jobs up there? How do you give them a sustaining economy? That's the conundrum. And then she brings up, well, we all have our conundrums in our own habitats and environments, our own place of living. Any thoughts or comments?
Ashworth's again. Sorry, we don't have our video on.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, we just got back from a short trip to Ely a couple weeks ago, and we had been thinking about this issue and seeing some of the state of neighborhoods and housing, and seeing just the economic hardships that are there, and thinking about jobs. And I think something that would certainly help as an alternative to relying on the mining is an increase in high-speed internet, broadband and things like that. And especially with all of the work that's gone into working from home and remote work, that it's a lot more feasible for people to imagine, living in Ely and working in a, good paying job that allows them to work from home in a beautiful area like Ely. But if they have the means and the setup and the internet, they can, more people can make that a reality.
The impetus for the infrastructure is there now because of the pandemic, and could help. Everything.
Yeah, and that's I'm hoping that the Biden administration can do that. I worked on the Navajo reservation in the late 90s, and that was my hope for them. I thought, how to bring people out of poverty that live so far away. I mean, it was 100 miles to the grocery store, and it seems to me that the internet is what can really help rural areas. And I hadn't bought a cell phone up until last year because my favorite places are rural areas. Cell phones don't work out there so often, and the frustration of it all. So I hope that the United States really works on that. Shall we move on? Izzy talks about disabilities. She talks fast, but she has a lot to say.
I'm excited to introduce to you Izzy Letterman, who is a 17-year-old disability justice activist who currently lives in Duluth, Minnesota. Welcome, Izzy.
Hello. Like she said, my name is Izzy Latterman. I'm 17. I live in Duluth, Minnesota, and I am disabled. People are dying, and we must work now, and we must work fast. This may sound harsh and dramatic, but the reality is even harsher and more dramatic. Every day, the climate crisis and its symptoms kill people, especially those made vulnerable by systemic racism, ableism, classism, and bigotry. As a disabled, chronically ill person, I know a lot about symptoms. To treat a condition, you must both treat the symptoms, like pollution and natural disasters, but more importantly, the root cause. And the root cause is heartless companies and governments putting profit over people. We cannot solve this crisis without treating the root cause, and you, as government officials and those in climate movements, can help treat the root cause. That being said, climate solutions must be intersectional. Too often, people with disabilities are left out. We have become what one writer calls expected casualties or unpreventable losses, with even the people fighting the crisis frequently failing to remember us. We have become background characters in a movement fighting a threat that will leave us especially vulnerable. By 2050, there will be at least 200 million people displaced by the climate crisis, according to The Guardian. Of the displaced, 18 million will be people with disabilities, and that number is expected to increase as catastrophes disable others. Minnesota, and especially my hometown of Duluth, is already being environmental refugees. The New York Times named Duluth one of 2 cities in the United States, the other being Buffalo, New York, that will be least affected by the climate crisis. People are going to move here, and some of those people are going to be disabled. Are you, the government, who still has so much to do to mitigate the crisis, going to aid them? The government already falls short in the aid it provides to disabled people. In order for the government to truly protect people with disabilities, it must start planning to provide quality assistance now. You must set up accessible emergency transportation, ensure that all will have access to the medication they need, and so much more. But you do not need to start from scratch. The government can turn to excellent work already done by organizations such as the World Institute on Disability, which has policy guides on these very things. The fact that there are no protections or preventions or conversations in place is a representation of the ableist society that we live in. We are forgotten and ignored, and that is not acceptable. There is no time to wait. People have already died. During Hurricane Katrina, a woman drowned in her own home because she couldn't walk away to escape. But disabled deaths can be prevented, and the government must act. I have 2 demands. 1, climate solutions must be made now and fast before it's too late. 2, climate solutions must be intersectional and accessible. Disabled people, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and working class people are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis and are feeling the effects of it now. You must have your solutions created by and approved by community members that will disproportionately feel the effects of the climate crisis and be impacted most by the solutions. If you do not, I can promise you that I and many others, including the people here, will continue to pester you and host events like this. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I will send a bunch of resources in the chat because you don't have to start from scratch. There's a lot of work already made that you can build off of.
So there is a lot on youthful enthusiasm. We certainly need that to solve this problem. But she also speaks for those that are often disenfranchised in the conversation and in what gets done. Any comments?
As she was talking, I was reflecting on my experience with an organization that I was part of founding. I talk about it in yesterday's or Friday's devotion. If you happen to catch that, the organization ultimately became called the Yellowstone Business Partnership, and one of the programs that we initiated was a sustainability training for variety of different industries that operated around the greater Yellowstone region, to look at the practices of our own businesses and how those could be adapted and changed and altered in such a way that was beneficial. And the goal was not to just be beneficial for the environment, but to also be beneficial for the business. There's a catchphrase called triple bottom line, which you want to bring not only profits to the bottom line of your enterprise, but you also want to benefit your community and you want to benefit the environment. And And those three can be tended to simultaneously if you're smart, and business people never like to be accused of being not smart. And so so when presented with these opportunities and this training program, it resulted in really profound changes in how businesses began to operate. And just some anecdotal examples from my own life in running the restaurant was we looked at and analyzed our garbage. And we actually had this huge dumpster outside the back door of the restaurant. And for the course of a week, we dumped it out and we sort of analyzed what was going in there. And if there was a way for us to divert our portions of our refuse stream and to divert that in different ways. 15 years ago, recycling in Montana was not where it is today, for sure. And so recycling, you'd think it was the natural thing, but it actually caused us to think differently about how we were purchasing and the different kinds of containers we could get things in. And ultimately, we live, operating in a remote location. We recognized that if we bought differently, we could actually save on shipping costs and all kinds of things. And ultimately, through all of the variety of things, we ended up reducing the size of our dumpster to about half because we were able to divert and reduce the amount of refuse we were generating. And that because we were charged each week by the size of our dumpster and how often it was getting picked up. And so by reducing the size and reducing the frequency during off seasons, we were able to save money, which was which is really important in the restaurant business, is to, because it's such a tight margin industry. We also began selling our cooked spent cooking oil to a biodiesel generating plant, and that I hadn't even considered as an option beforehand. So and lots and lots of stories like that, and that was just the restaurant. But really profound things, and communities and businesses can lead the charge in some of these initiatives and some of these efforts if they just get smart about it, right? And sort of attend to the problem with their same kind of creative entrepreneurial spirit that we have. So that's my comment on that. Kurt has a response.
Just a comment what you just saw. Mining 50 years ago or 100 years ago, you wouldn't recognize it today if you step back in 1920. The ingenuity of people is tremendous. Look at Oakdale. They were poisoning themselves with bad water for the last 30 years. They finally found out that somebody could do about it. They cleaned up their water system. It cost a lot of money, but with the environment and status of living and the quality of living was improved tremendously. Not just somebody from Washington, D.C. imposing a rule. They did it themselves. And that's what's, in my faith, of what you're looking at. I depend on people's ingenuity. And as Peter said, they're smart. And some of the things aren't all that tough to counteract with. So we got a problem with climate change. What do we need to change, and what's the opportunities to, I say the farmers have done a great job in doing it. I'd hate to go out and start up farming because I wouldn't know a heck of a lot about it. But it's happening, and it's why one farmer used to have 5 or 10, I guess probably most 40 or 50 people can depend on one farmer on food at just one item. That's not easy to do. Peter, you have to recognize the problem. You have to be ingenuity enough to identify what the problem is. And then the things changes when it what's halfway through. But that's a challenge. That's why we have scientists, we have educators, we have, yes, preachers that teach us how.
Thanks, Kurt. Gus Haugen has a comment.
Okay, I think we have to realize that we are in a climate war. The beverage industry, the fossil fuel industries, coke, coal, a lot of governments depend upon the oil, Saudi Arabia and so on. And many of these industries do not want to change. They really want the profits. And so we are in a war. If we're going to save our planet and save this world, we have to begin doing something. We need government regulations and some collective actions to really solve this problem. And so a lot of these industries have put it back on the individual, but it's not just what the individual can do, but also things have to change in these industries. And so we really have to get away from our addiction to fossil fuels. We have to do something to keep the atmosphere from getting so much carbon dioxide, and which is really ruining our planet. And so this is really a moral issue. And so we really have to wake up to what's going on.
Thanks, Gus. Paul Sponheim and then Michael Stetzler. Oh, Paul, you're still muted.
That'll be better.
Got it.
I'm thinking about ways the church can be helpful. And I think the image of how we are related to nature is crucial. We are part of nature. So the notion of companion species, that the other creatures and we are together in nature. There's a tendency to elevate humankind above the creation. We are creatures. The planet is our home. We take care of our home. I don't know if, Carol, you know the work of Paul Santmeyer, Lutheran pastor, Paul Santmeyer. And way back he wrote The Travail of Creation, the ambiguous promise of Christian ecological theology, Paul Santmeyer. And he works with three biblical metaphors: the metaphor of ascent, the metaphor of fecundity, and the metaphor of migration to a good land. And the particular metaphors we employ to help us understand that we are part of nature and that we are not above nature. We belong here. So I think there are a number of ways that we can contribute as to the metaphorical thinking of the culture.
Thanks, Paul. Michael.
I just wanted to kind of counter something that Kurt said, because he seemed to suggest that government regulation didn't play much of a part in that Oakdale solution.
I didn't say that, Mike. Don't paraphrase me on that one.
Okay, I said seemed to say. Thank you for correcting me. But the history of that is that 3M did recognize the problem, and back in 2007, they did set aside $40 million for mitigation of the pollution that they'd caused for several years. But the only reason that new plant in Oakdale, the new long-term solution, is being developed is because the Attorney General sued them and won an $850 million judgment against 3M to do that. So I think it's important not to kill good progress by over-regulating, but we also have to recognize the utility of government action to correct these things.
Thanks, Michael.
I've got a couple of things to add too, and one is, Izzy and others have brought up the idea that we need to be including more voices in the conversation and to be listening to one another and to listen to one another's stories, and that's such a huge thing. And I think we see that especially in recent months with all the demonstrations that are going on right now. that individuals, when we get out there and share our thoughts, we start opening up hearts and minds, and that makes a huge difference. We can make a difference. The other thing is picking up on what Paul was saying, and that leads us into the next one, which is a poem. I went to the World Religion Parliamentary sessions about 5 years ago, and one of the sessions I went to, one of the discussions was on environment, and we talked in the small group I was in. We talked some about stewardship. I brought up the fact, well, as Christians, Judaic Christian people, we feel that God has called us to be stewards of the world. And one of the people in the group pointed out, well, unfortunately, our history has shown us that we have interpreted that in a way, like Paul was saying, where we have elevated ourselves above creation. We have separated ourselves from creation, that we're the ones with all the answers. We're the ones who are king of creation. And that's the wrong way to look at stewardship of creation. And they didn't even like the word stewardship because that seemed to put a hierarchy in there. And to say that, we are really part of creation and we are connected to creation deeply. We are creatures, and we have so much to learn about how creation is interconnected and that we are a part of it. And there's so much that nature can teach us. And that's a little bit about what the poem is about coming up. Paul, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Santmeyer is specifically critical of the image of stewardship.
Okay.
If we are stewards, we are in charge.
Yeah.
We are going to subdue the earth. We're going to take charge. Is our relationship to nature an I-thou relationship, or is it an I-it relationship, to use Buber's old terms?
Yeah.
And Santmeyer says it's neither I-thou or I-it. Humankind has some distinctive role to play. The power of language, for example, that human beings have a special claim on. But to put us above nature would be a mistake. And he even proposes a third, not I thou, not I it, but I ens, E-N-S. That's the participial form of the verb to be. So it is a recognition that we share living life together. I also just wanted to mention that it was very encouraging when Joe Biden created a cabinet level position. And it's very encouraging that John Kerry is the climate ambassador. And Kerry has been in China negotiating there. He's been in South Korea. There are active negotiations on the international level. I also just wanted to mention 350.org. That's an organization we can help. We have reached 400 parts per million of CO2. We have to get it down below 350.
Gus, you have something fast to say so we can get to our poem? Or we're going to go.
We have a kind of a unique planet. I don't know of any place else in the universe quite like the planet that we have here. We're just the right distance from the sun. We have water in the oceans. We have oxygen in our air. It's really ideal. If we don't wreck it, it's from what I can tell with climate change, that we are doing some pretty bad things to our planet, and we really need to change. And it isn't just us, but it's also our industries, the beverage, the fossil fuel industries. We've got to make some big changes if we want to save this world.
Okay, let's listen to this poem here.
Next, I'm glad to introduce Dr. Katie Backus-Kazimanil, who is a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, where she teaches classes and leads research to improve health equity. She's also a mom to 2 amazing kids and a pet gecko. And Katie will be sharing a poem with us this evening.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I am so delighted to be here among this wonderful group of people. My name is Katie Backus-Kazimanil. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white and Anishinaabe woman on Dakota land, and I'm going to share a poem with you today. I have never before published a poem. I have never before spoken one publicly, so bear with me as we do this. And I wrote this poem because of the hope that I felt as the voices of Indigenous women rose into positions of leadership here in Minnesota and across the land. So I'm happy to share with you. I'm going to read right from the book that I hope you all have as well. This poem is called Bago-Senin, Hope. 3 strands of sweetgrass, braided, entwined. Wisdom, nurturance, love. Indigenous women rise strong of this land, for our future. When Native voices lead, there's resonance in the water, the air, the plants and creatures. So injured from centuries of exploitation and neglect, still enduring, still containing all of the essential knowledge of resilience, revealed in Anishinaabe Kwe, leading us forward, onward to a restoration of social and environmental justice. We are stewards of this place. Sweetgrass, the long hair of Mother Earth, is a gift and a reminder of our duty, and the honor of following the path built by Indigenous women, and the gift of hope. Hope that our earth will return to sacredness. Thank you so much, Miigwech.
So she speaks of the wisdom and the nurturance and the love of the sweetgrass and of the land, and I think that's really what we need to start seeing in creation, that we are connected with and that we are part of, and just a creature in it, and we need to have more of a partnership with nature. Jean.
In the spirit of what that beautiful poem she wrote, I just finished a book entitled The Seed Keeper, S-E-E-D Keeper, by Diane Wilson. Dakota, she brought me back to the realization how God's Spirit is working through all of our creation, as Paul reminded me too, spoke of. But a beautiful book, a book that some may question, and she talks about the seeds and how the seeds have been changed, the seeds that were carried by her ancestors and passed on down to be the food that they needed whenever they were starving. They'd keep the seeds and care for them, and how seeds that were changed through chemicals and things. But it was excellent book for me to read as we reach spring and the seeds are sprouting and I look at creation around me. The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson.
Thanks.
I just wanted to mention braiding sweetgrass.
Yes.
This is Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is an enrolled member of the Potawatomi Nation, and she is a PhD in botany, and the book is about what the plants can teach us. They can teach us much.
Yeah, I've got that book and I've given it as gifts. That's a great book. Yeah.
Carol, any final words before we wrap it up here. I don't know that we'll have time for just that last section.
The
So
last is only a minute and a half long, and we can leave that as the last word, I think.
okay.
Things in there. So
Well,
let's get that to end.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. So good to be together with all of you today. After the video plays, I'm just going to end our session. I have to get off to join the junior high and high schoolers here shortly too. So,
We have had quite the packed evening of engaging speakers, and I am inspired by listening to the stories, poetry, and music that have been shared in such a heartfelt way by all of our speakers. And I hope that you are too. I want to say thank you to all of our legislators who have joined us tonight, and to all the participants and viewers watching. It's a reminder that when we listen with compassion, it can help strip away the rhetoric that divides us, and to feel the humanity that is really at the center of climate justice, and to find our shared values. To our legislators, our message is clear that the time is now for Minnesota to lead with bipartisan legislation. This session, you will have the opportunity to advance solutions that cross all sectors and support Minnesotans at the intersections of climate impacts in clean energy, transportation, education, health, and more. And we ask that you hold these voices of the communities that you serve as you make these critical decisions on behalf of all of us. And with that, thank you for your time and good night.
And one last word. The book that they keep talking about is Eyewitness. You can find it online, eyewitness.org or .com. And it's only $5 plus shipping. And it's got all sorts of essays and poetry and artwork. But Minnesota Voice is talking about climate change and their stories and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. Have a good Sunday.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. Good program.